If you consider the meaning of life to be about the struggles one goes through, then between the Pixel 4 and Stadia, Google's full of life right now. So let's toss some Linux in while we're at it. This is the Android Police Podcast. It's Wednesday, November 20th. I'm David Ruddick, and it's about time we had back on our guest today. He spent 2 fantabulous years at AP before leaving and spending every minute since kicking the butt at Ars Technica. Another fantastic write-in from Jules there. It's Ron Amadeo.
What's up? Hi.
Ron, it's been a little while since I think you've been on the show. I feel like the last time was maybe like the Google I.O. podcast.
Yeah. The Google I.O. podcast is a tradition where all of us drunk idiots get together and podcast from your couch. It's awesome.
Yes, and Artem refuses to join us out of principle. So we have a few things to talk about this week. But Ron, you have spent like you went to this thing. I didn't even know.
I didn't go to a thing.
You didn't go to a thing?
No, I watched a 3-hour video on YouTube, man.
Oh God, even worse. So let's talk about this. I wasn't even aware this was happening or like that there would be Android related announcements at this event. It's the Linux Plumbers Conference, which is like the least like it doesn't sound official or important at all, but apparently some very low level stuff happening with the Linux kernel, and some of it relates significantly to Android right now. So Ron, what did you learn?
Well, yeah, I mean, first the Linux Plumbers Conference happens every year, and it's like we're used to Google I/O, I guess, where it's like the people on stage are like Google developers, and then like everybody audience is like of a lower tier, like app developers and journalists and stuff like that. The Linux Plumbers Conference, I guess it's like invite only, and it's like 50 or some people that all work on Linux, and they're all like peers. So like the people on stage and the people in the audience are all like the big name Linux developers. So yeah, like crazy stuff gets talked about there. And they're talking about bringing the like Android kernel that gets shipped on your phone and kind of merging that with the Linux kernel that actually gets used in desktop computers. And this was basically a YouTube 3-hour like brainstorm session between the various parade of Googlers on stage and the Linux people in the audience about how to kind of make these things come together. And like they talked about it last year, they kind of pitched the idea last year, and this year they had a lot more information to talk about and how they wanted to do it and stuff like that.
Interesting. So like I guess probably they're discussing this at such a like low level that like extracting any kind of analysis in terms of what it means for Android might be a little difficult. But was there anything that kind of like that you feel? I mean, for me, even I don't really understand a lot of this stuff, and so I like struggle to understand like what would be the benefits to bringing Android's Linux kernel into the mainline Linux kernel, other than the obvious stuff. Like obviously, it's going to get all the security benefits that are in the mainline Linux kernel. It'll be more up to date more frequently, and hopefully not break things. But I don't know. These are all like really big questions, and I feel like wouldn't even know where to begin, like looking for answers to them.
Well, I mean, the obvious stuff is a great place to start. I mean, right now, the kernel that ends up in your device is a brand new device ships with a 2-year-old Linux kernel. So yeah, you lose all of the security patches and new features that get added to the Linux kernel. And the Linux kernel is the world's biggest software project. So like if you are not on mainline, the amount of things that just happen every day happens at such an insane pace that like it's so hard to keep up with your crappy fork of the Linux kernel. But also like part of the reason that Android is this kind of like insulated embedded system that you can't move from device to device is because every Linux kernel that ends up on an Android device is specific to only that device. And all of the hardware support is like baked in to the kernel for that one item. And you can't like move it around the way you can like Linux on a desktop. Yeah, Google just talked about all of the ways we could change things so that doesn't happen.
So I see one of the little items we have in the sheet here says that abstraction essentially locks in the base kernel version, and Google will be forced to support 6 years of Linux long-term support releases. So is that do we think that's going to have any kind of effect on like the update lifetime of phones? Will it make them easier to support longer, or is this really just all very specific to the Linux kernel?
I think the core of how long a phone gets supported is kind of up to Qualcomm, because they need to. I think they need to continue supporting update, the whole update process of their SoCs. I don't know if they would be willing to do that for longer, but it would certainly make it less work. Like, Google draws a lot of comparisons to Project Treble with this new kernel thing, which doesn't have a silly project name yet. I don't know why, but it's just kind of like the like separation and modularizing of hardware like dependencies, so that code can be more portable and more easily updated. And like, they talked about how like a Linux kernel gets on your phone, and it's like a series of forks. So like, Google takes the Linux kernel and turns it into the Android kernel. So like, they add special Android code to it, basically, and like, that's a fork. And then they give that to Qualcomm, and then Qualcomm forks that Android kernel, and they add all their Qualcomm specific code for like the Snapdragon 855, and then that gets sent to Samsung, and Samsung forks that, and then they add code specific for Galaxy S10, and then that ends up on your phone, and it only works on that because it's been forked like 3 or 4 times by now, and that's why everything's 2 years old, and why everything's so slow and difficult to port around.
Interesting. So I guess like this kind of speaks to a broader effort, I think, on the Android team, where I've seen a lot of investment in reducing the amount of work partners have to do. Like I feel like that motivates so much of what's going on with Android anymore, and it makes it harder to explain to people like why this matters in the end. Like, if Samsung has to do less work on the kernel, if Samsung is not going to have to deal with this, they can focus probably software development resources on other things. They can, feel less rushed. I mean, phones are always on a rush timeline for software. We review phones. We know we get phones with unstable software to review like all the time. Like, it's gotten better. I won't lie about that. Like, I remember like back in the day, you could get some seriously rough pre-release builds on review units. But I think Google, really is making a big effort just to try to. I just activated my Google Home. Is making a big effort to try to really, I guess, like the word I've been using is like make Android much more modular and make it such that they can ship big chunks of it out to their partners and say, this is set up. You don't need to worry about it. Like, we have these hooks in here for you to work with. Let's stop tinkering with the like low level parts of the system.
Right, and that works great for Android when it's something Google controls. But Google goes up in front of the audience. It's like, listen, we ship really old Linux kernels. The way we're going to fix that is to have you guys do a whole bunch of work and totally change, the layout of how the Linux kernel works. And isn't this a great solution? Let's all do it. Let's have you do all of this change so that it makes our lives better. And like, is the Linux community going to do that? Maybe. I mean,
so this is just a proposal.
Oh yeah. I mean, they sometimes they would go up there and say, "This is a problem that we have. Does anyone in the audience know how we can fix this?" Because because the people in the audience like are the people that you want to talk about how to fix these things. And sometimes those were other people from Google, from different divisions. Sometimes they were people from Linux. So yeah, it sounds like it's a crazy environment, but also like the mood in the crowd, it didn't seem like people were like skeptical or against the idea. It seemed like everyone was kind of like brainstorming on how to make this happen, because Android, after all, is probably the biggest Linux distribution,
of course, by
ever.
far. Yeah.
And they did get the Linux community recently to extend the timeline for kernel support. So like, long-term support used to be 2 years or 4 years or something, and now it's 6. And they did that specifically because Android takes so long to ship these things, and they want them to ship kernels that get security updates.
Yeah. I think I think the fact that Android is so big now, it's hard to probably for the Linux community to ignore the reality of like this is what a Linux distro in the wild looks like now. Do you want to make it better? Like,
Right.
I mean, they have to have some level of like, pride and self-respect to say like, well, I guess we should probably make it such that the most popular Linux distribution for the foreseeable future like is at least a little more updatable, a little more portable, because it's never going to be the year of Linux on the desktop.
Right. And the cool thing is like they've made a ton of progress. Like somebody had a phone there from Lenario. It was like a Poco F1, that cheap Xiaomi phone that was like running the regular Linux kernel with Android. And I guess that's the first phone on earth to do it, and it works for that phone only. And they need to kind of do an ecosystem-wide investigation of like, well, this hardware works. What do we need to do to make the other hardware work? And Samsung's fingerprint or heart rate scanners and all of those weird crazy things that Android phones ship with need to have like a modularized plugin for the Linux kernel.
Yeah, and there's so many. I mean, obviously, like you have that extra layer with Qualcomm where they are adding so many things because of all their custom hardware. So they are such a big player in this too. I wonder if Qualcomm had people there.
Right. Yeah, I didn't see any, but like the suggestion that Google made is to have like a stable API or ABI where just like Project Treble, where like, okay, this is like the code that you can plug into, and then you can write modules that plug into this code for like your speakers and microphones and SoCs and whatever else. And this is suggested so frequently in the Linux kernel community that they have like a document on why they don't want to do this. And what the document says is like, we don't want to do this because the best way to be kept up to date with the Linux kernel is to open source your driver code. And then we will stick it in the Linux kernel and we will maintain it for you. And that kind of like open source religious motivation is the reason that this does not exist. And Google's basically saying, look, that's not realistic. Qualcomm's never going to open source their SoC drivers.
Of course.
Your option is either nothing or a modular solution. So let's make a modular solution so you can like plug in a binary blob and have it work.
Yeah, I think that is probably the toughest part of the conversation. The Linux community has like inherited this like militant attitude from Linus Torvalds over the years, like where he has been so adamant about what companies need to do in order to like be a friend of the Linux Foundation. And I think that probably plays into a lot of their beliefs, which unfortunately, like you said, it's totally unrealistic to expect Qualcomm to open source its drivers. Like their GPU, they don't even like tell you what the architecture is. Like they have to do X-ray scans of Qualcomm GPUs to determine like what the layout is, because they just won't say anything. These companies are so secretive about like the marginal advantages they can achieve over their competitors. They never want to let that stuff get out in the wild. It's just another avenue to get reverse engineered somehow. So, like if Qualcomm open sourced its GPU drivers, like imagine how much IP theft from China would happen immediately. Like they would steal everything and they wouldn't respect the open source license. They don't care. So I think that that's not just companies being greedy. It's also like companies rightfully, probably being like, hey, we like created a lot of this stuff. It does important things. We are proud of it and we believe it gives us a competitive advantage. Also, we don't want everybody else to share our competitive advantage. And I think that's reasonable. Like that's how companies make money. That's how you get the very nice smartphone you have in your pocket. So I think it's a fair point, even if like the Linux community doesn't care, because to them it's all just about like the philosophy behind it. I don't know. So let's see here. I feel like we've probably exhausted the Linux Plumbers Conference for now. I didn't even realize this was just like a proposal, so I wonder how long if we'll hear about this at Google I/O next year, if any progress has been made, or if this is like going to be a years-long battle.
Yeah, they basically ended it with saying, "Oh, we have miles to go, but we know what problems we need to tackle now," and they've only been working on it for like 2 years or so. So yeah, give it time.
Yeah, like everything. But I think one of the other topics we should discuss today, reviews of Stadia are out, and we haven't really discussed it too much on the show as of yet. I think we talked about it a little bit on Monday, but Ron, I'd like to get your opinion and attitude on Stadia so far, because I feel like the reviewer experiences have been highly divergent. Like your guys' review was pretty brutal. Our review was like, it's fine. It's fine. It works. And so there was definitely immediately apparent on launch day, like, oh, this is typical Google.
Yeah. Stadia. So I played Project Stream and I played Stadia at shows a few times. Project Stream I got to play at my house, but like the Stadia that I played at shows was like Google controlled Stadia that, works fine. But like I think the bigger problem with Stadia, rather than does it work, is like, who is this supposed to be for? Because like I feel like Google designed a platform that is very appropriate for a casual gamer that like doesn't want to invest in a console, doesn't have a console already, and maybe won't notice the couple lag issues that popped up. But then they loaded it with a game library that appeals like exclusively to hardcore gamers. Like the big games are Destiny 2 and Doom 5 or whatever number Doom's up to now. And like I don't think the game selection and platform capabilities really go together in a thing that anybody's gonna like want to buy. Because anybody that likes to play competitive shooters is gonna have an Xbox. I don't think the market for those style games can get much bigger.
Yeah, and I think that for me, what I run up against is like Google's argument has been that consoles have served as a barrier to entry for a lot of people. And I don't know, man. Like in like the year 2019, I don't think that's nearly as true as it was like 20 years ago. Consoles were comparatively more expensive back in the day a lot of the time, and games were still pretty expensive. Games, I think, have actually, gotten cheaper if you adjust for inflation. Even with the bump to $60, I think games are cheaper today than they were 20 years ago. Because I remember Sega games being $50, like back in the day. There were some expensive games out there. So I don't know that like financial accessibility is a good sell for this. I think the problem right now is that it's only available with the subscription mode, which I think is coloring a lot of the reviews. I think once this goes totally free and you can just buy your games, like if there's just one game you want to play, you can play it for free on Stadia at 1080p, assuming it works reasonably well. You supply your own controller, you can use your PC or laptop or whatever. I still feel like that's a very appealing thing. I think the idea that it replaces a game console, like, nah, I don't think that's the case. So I do wonder, like you said, how big is the market? How many of these people are out there that want this, like that don't already have access to a game console? Because game consoles have become really cheap. Like the Nintendo Switch has proven that like there's still a lot of people out there who are perfectly happy to pay for a game console that's not very technologically advanced, has a lot of compromises, but they get to take it everywhere with them, and it plays a lot of the games they know and love. So
yeah, and the thing to your point about it not removing a financial barrier is that like you still need an incredible internet connection and a great like Wi-Fi network in order for this to work. Like you can't be, if you're a low income family or like someone in the developing world or whatever, like Stadia isn't going to work unless you have a fairly like rich person's internet. Just because it has so many demands on your local network performance and your wider internet performance that it doesn't work on crappy internet.
Yeah.
And it's never going to work on LTE or anything like that either.
So I know what Google's like plan with mobile is, and it's just like I feel like Stadia, like so many of these like streaming services have been, is like ahead of its time still. I think Google's betting that with 5G, the latency reductions will make it such that playing over mobile will become tenable for some people in some regions whenever we get 5G, and apparently like, I don't know,
Never.
10 years.
Yeah,
exactly. It's going to take forever. So I feel like that part of it, it's like, it would feel so much more complete if we were at a place where a mobile internet connection really could, support a stable like connection to a service like this. At that point, I could see it a lot more clearly. Like you could play like your favorite games, like on the bus, on the train, or in a car. It doesn't matter. Like that fantasy, I think, is like a lot of gamers do want that. Like, and those are people who have consoles or have PCs and are just like being frustrated by technology at this point. The fact that mobile internet connections aren't good enough for this. So I think that's like a dream to aspire to. But like Microsoft is doing this, PlayStation's already doing this. Nvidia has a service too. Steam, you can use Steam Link to the same effect to play games on mobile if you really want to, be a masochist that way. But Google's advantage seems to be a lot more nebulous to me. I don't really know what they're bringing to the table that's special. Like Microsoft's xCloud thing looks like basically the same.
Yeah, Google would say what they're bringing special is their infrastructure, but like I think we've seen a huge like variability of performance in reviews, and I think a big part of that is people's Wi-Fi connection. Like they're trying this over Wi-Fi, and it is not working. And like Stadia is the hardest thing your internet will ever do. Because I've seen like crazy reports out there that are like, oh, if you can watch YouTube, you can run Stadia. And it's like, no, YouTube gets to be buffered. You can download 10 or 10 seconds or a minute of a YouTube video at a time. Stadia, it's one frame at a time. If your Wi-Fi connection has the slightest little issue, or somebody turns on a microwave, or a person next door starts watching Netflix, your performance goes to crap. And that is way too much to ask of most people's Wi-Fi networks.
Yeah, I agree. And like it also relies on concepts like jitter, which most people aren't even aware of like what their network jitter is. So, you could have like the network just bounce for a moment and like you end up losing several seconds of gameplay. And I'm sure that Google has built in some like fail-safing to try to mitigate that. But like the reality of Wi-Fi is that it's a messy, imperfect technology and performance is very inconsistent.
Oh, and did you see the Nest? The Nest router has a Stadia mode.
Does it?
It will try to like boost your gaming performance for your device.
I mean, that's kind of cool. I will say the Google Wi-Fi is the best Wi-Fi router I've ever had. Like it is no issues, no fuss. Like I think I've had to reset it once ever. And it works. It just works. So I will say Google like probably has the best product for this experience.
And do you want a microphone in it?
Not really, no. I would turn off the always on functionality in the Nest Wi-Fi. I don't really understand that product. I think getting off track here, I think Google is getting a little desperate to shove a speaker into everything they can. Like it's kind of ridiculous at this point. But with Stadia, I know I'm not the target audience. I would sometimes like to play games on the go, but I don't really care about it enough to like make it an investment. I wouldn't spend money on that. I have a gaming PC. Like, it's just, it doesn't make much sense. And then the whole idea of like investing like $60 in a game that you don't own, I think some people can get past that. I personally am still I would have trepidation. Like I would be concerned.
Yeah, I think it has a much stronger future as a demo product. Like, hey, this game came out. Click here and play it for 10 minutes right now on your computer. No waiting. It's going to take like 10 seconds to start up.
Oh,
give it a try right now.
The instant gratification angle is not one I had considered. That could probably convert sales. I bet they could get people to buy stuff by doing that. Like play 15 minutes of Red Dead Redemption 2. And then, like a big screen pops up and says, buy now. I mean, that's kind of cool, actually.
But what I would imagine would happen is this game's coming out on Xbox, PlayStation, PC, and Stadia. Click here, play the Stadia version for 10 minutes, see if you like it, and then buy it for your Xbox.
Yes, so Google essentially gets Best Buy'd by by everybody.
Yeah,
that's so true. Yeah, because honestly, who wants to take the time to like download a demo of a game? It's pain in the ass. So, I guess we'll see what happens with it. The reviews have like significantly tempered my excitement over what I think Google has, and the fact that they had to like delay a bunch of the features that they initially announced as part of it. It's just like it's so typical Google. Everything about it, like, oh, all that cool stuff we said it would do that would make it interesting and unique in the marketplace. Well, you're gonna have to wait a little while for that. We don't know when.
Yeah, I mean, it's not even interesting and unique. It's stuff like achievements don't work, and you can't do family sharing, and like all of these basic features don't work yet. I don't even think this controller works wirelessly on all platforms, and like every platform has a different implementation with different quality levels. It's a beta test. It's a beta test that people can pay for.
It is a beta test. I absolutely agree with that. It's unfortunately a case where Google really is testing a product on the public, and we know how that tends to go. I'm going to run our ad real quick here before we switch gears. Hey, if you're watching the Android Police podcast on Twitch today, thank you so much. And if you are watching us on Twitch, we'd really appreciate it if you subscribed. If you're an Amazon Prime member, you can subscribe to us for free on Twitch. You can subscribe to one channel per month on Twitch. You do have to renew that every month if you want to keep supporting us, but it does not cost you any money. And it gives Amazon's money to us. So if you want to take Jeff Bezos' money and give it to us, subscribe to us on Twitch. We really appreciate it. And, you know, if you're able to join us for the live show, you can ask questions in the chat, talk with the hosts, mostly with Jules, because usually we're talking. But, you know, it's awesome. You can also pay to subscribe if you want to. Tiers start at $5 a month. You can get extra entries into AP giveaways if you're a subscriber. You can also learn. There's no also. You can just go to twitch.tv/AndroidPolice. Please subscribe. And if you don't use Twitch, head to AndroidPolice.com and you can hit the donate button if you just want to make a one-time donation saying thanks for the show or thanks for doing Android Police or whatever. Thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll get back to the show. Again, that's twitch.tv/Android Police. We're live 4 times a week, 3 podcasts, and then 1 Q&A show on Tuesdays. Okay. So, you know, let's talk a little bit about, you know, you've been at ARS for how long now? Like 4 years?
Oh, dude, you said I was at Android Police for 2 years. That was total news to me. I don't know, man. Time is whatever. Probably 5 years, I want to say. Maybe
5 years. That sounds about right. I remember because I feel like one of the first. Were you at the? I feel like you were at the event. The first event I went to that you were with ARS that was in New York was the LG. Was it the G5? Something like that.
That was an event I went to. I don't know. They all blur together.
The one that was at like the World Trade Center. It was one that was at your office because we went to the cafeteria, the Condé Nast cafeteria afterward. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. 5 years. We had Eric on the other week, and I also got to feel sad about how long I've been with Android Police. I'm coming up on my 10th anniversary next year, Ron. It's been a long time. So, what are you doing these days at our society? So, like, you write about Android, but obviously there's more to the world than Android. Are there any other topics you're like breaking into these days?
I mean, I started doing all of this for fun. So like Android is kind of what I want to write about. So not really. I mean, occasionally I get to write about cars, which is fun. I wrote a thing, I don't know, a couple of years ago that was like various car infotainment systems and like comparing and trashing them the same way I would a cell phone,
That's
which
awesome.
was super fun. Yeah, I don't know. I want to start writing more about smart home stuff, I guess. But there's so many cell phones. I don't really have too much time for any of that.
Yeah, smart. There are a lot of phones. But I feel like phones are getting to the point where they're getting so much like just being a commodity. Like, it's hard for me to personally get very excited about a given phone for more than like 5 minutes anymore. You know, I learned like the little list of features that make it slightly different than every other phone and then like mostly move on. I don't know that I have I will say that I have lost a lot of the lust for reviewing phones. It's not something I really enjoy anymore. The car stuff is interesting though. Like reviewing infotainment systems. Like, you could be the most brutal critic in the universe. Talk about like just so terrible.
Yeah, I managed to hunt down what operating system was under like each infotainment system. And it's always like Linux or like QNX, which either is the company that owns BlackBerry or BlackBerry owns them. One of those. It's Linux, QNS, and sometimes Android. And like the oldest, saddest version of Android you could possibly imagine, like gingerbread ice cream sandwich.
Yes.
It's super bad. But I think I'm going to get a hold of a Polestar. Is it a Polestar 2?
Yeah, the new
the
EV
electric
with the Android
Volkswagen?
Automotive. Yeah.
And look at Android Automotive. That'll be super fun.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited for that. I've been talking with them about getting on that launch. I feel like I know they're partners so far. They've got Polestar. I think they announced that Fiat Chrysler is going to be a partner with them, but Fiat Chrysler won't bundle the Google apps, which is so weird. They're just going to have the OS and then choose application partners.
Okay.
Which, yeah, so I think it's a way for them to make money.
Right. There are
Like,
sales to be made.
yeah, exactly, which to me is gross. I can't believe Google's allowing them to do that. That's not nice. But I feel like there's another automaker that announced that they were getting on board with it too. Because you're right. Like, I know that Hyundai used ice cream sandwich on their infotainment for years. I'm not
Yeah.
sure if they still do, but I think it's because a lot of these car companies use like Harman Kardon is their supply partner, and Harman develops the software. Like, so Samsung is the company that actually technically supplies a lot of this stuff now. Or LG too. LG does like all of GM stuff. Like, so whatever like is on GM's cars, it's an LG infotainment system.
You'd think they'd be better at this then. Because, I
No,
mean, how long ago did Samsung buy Harman Kardon?
it was a couple of years ago.
Okay. And enough to matter in the glacier slow development of a car infotainment system.
Probably
like,
not.
Everything takes 5 years and everything is 5 years old as a result. Like, there's no magic to it. We started developing this 5 years ago and we released it today. And yes, that's how old of a version of Android you're going to get. Usually.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I was talking with the Polestar guys about this, and I was talking to some of the Google people, one of the like the product manager for Android Automotive. And he's like, yeah, when we started working with Polestar, they're like, oh yeah, usually we like to do like software freeze a year ahead of production. And the Google guy's like, that's literally never going to work. Like, you're gonna have to pick a different infotainment system partner if you want to do that.
And
so
Google was probably like, we were thinking of shipping final software like 30 days after the car came out.
Exactly.
No,
like, I can't.
Not you.
I can't wait for the first reviews to be like, full disclosure, this car is running a beta software build, not representative of final retail unit experience.
Yeah.
But it will be cool, I think, to have like Google like updating stuff, like maps, like so that they can then break things, but also keep them up to date. Like, that's the worst thing about a car. Like, the infotainment system ages out in horrible ways. I have a Mazda infotainment system and it is trash. It is just garbage, no good, very bad. It's one of those crappy Linux distro ones. Like, you can be upgraded to run Android Auto on it, but honestly it performs so like terribly. Like, I'm just like, why would I pay $500 to add Android Auto to my objectively terrible infotainment?
You have to pay to add Android Auto.
Yes, because it's a retrofit.
Great. Wow.
Because they also have to install a 2.1 amp USB hub into the car, because it only ships with a 1 amp hub. Like, my car does not charge my phone appreciably.
Oh, okay.
Like, it's so slow. So I'm happy to see, like, I'm going to be excited to try out the Polestar too. Like, it should be pretty awesome.
I think they're also doing Android Automotive on some kind of SUV. Is it like an X or Q?
Oh yeah, the XC. Yeah. Volvo is the other one, because Volvo is the same company as Polestar, so that makes sense.
Right. So if they won't give you a Polestar, try for the SUV. It doesn't matter. It should all be the same software.
Oh, one of our listeners says, full disclosure, I worked with the Dallas-based Toyota CV team on their Camry and Lexus CV head unit platform. That was all of the old Toyota like infotainment systems are among the very worst. I think because they're licensed from Subaru, or is it Subaru that licenses from Toyota? They're like, they have been like the most harangued of any of them out there. I know Subaru just got Android Auto like in the last year. It took them that long. Cars are such like reviewing cars from a technological standpoint, I would probably just eventually tear my hair out. I would just not want to do it. It would be so depressing.
It's back to like early Android phones back in the day, where just nobody knows what they're doing. It's a crazy wild west of abandoned software and hardware that doesn't work. And it's super fun to write about.
It is. I do love to write about it. Like, it is really, really not. It's pretty brutal. quite frankly. Like I was driving a Hyundai last year to CES, and like their infotainment system has not changed appreciably in like 4 or 5 years now, just because the development cycles are so long. But so cars, let's see, what else can we talk about today? Sorry, usually it's a little more, it's not, I'm kidding. It's not usually more structured than this. Well, let's talk about Pixel 4 a little bit. I think we're always good for a little Pixel 4 bashing here. And Ron, your review was, I think, the most brutal to date.
Really? All right.
Yes, it absolutely was.
It didn't end with it in a trash can, so it can't be that brutal. That's my benchmark.
That is a piece of Android police history. Oh, that's good content.
The Pixel 4, yeah, I mean, it just seems cheap. Like, and I don't mean like the materials or build quality is bad. I mean, it just feels like Google built it down to a price, and to get there, they had to like cut the spec sheet down considerably. But then they didn't pass any of this on to consumers. Like, it seems like it's a cut rate phone that they still sold for $900. I mean, like there's less RAM than other phones. There's less storage. The storage is slow. If you're going to do the multi-camera thing, there's not enough cameras because everybody else has 3 and you've got 2. The battery's super small. There's no Wi-Fi 6, even though that's built into the Qualcomm SoC, and you just need to add an antenna thing to it. They cut back on the inbox accessories, like the headphone jack adapter and headphones. They cut the cloud storage. So like there's all of these things where they made these changes for, I'm sure Google would make some kind of stupid argument in favor of them, but like they made all of these changes to increase their profit margins, it seems like. And I don't really understand why, but it just seems like remember the old OnePlus phones that would come out like 5 years ago where they would, here's a high-end phone with the latest SoC for like $300 or whatever. And it's like, yeah, they cut a couple corners, but for $300 it's fine. But then for 800 or 900, it's not fine at all.
Yeah, I have to agree this year that it's just not been a good situation. I feel like once the Pixel 4a comes out next year, like the shoe's going to drop. Like, so Google can make 2 decisions to me with the Pixel 4a. They can either choose to keep the camera array from the Pixel 4 and 4 XL, or they can keep its single camera on the back just out of spite and differentiation. And I think if they put the dual camera on the back, like game over. Every review is just going to say, don't buy a Pixel 4, just buy the cheaper one if you want Google software experience. And I feel like that was true this year too. Like I told most people, like if you don't really care about having the latest like tech in your phone, just buy a Pixel 3a. It's good. It's fine. It's cheap.
Yeah, other than is it a wide angle lens? Yeah, or telephoto. Other than the telephoto lens, it's the same camera. I think it's certainly the same sensor. They backported the astrophotography and all those other features. So like, you're not. Camera was the only thing the Pixel line did well, and like if basically the same ones on the cheaper one, get that.
Yeah, I don't really get how their business strategy is going to work going forward if they're just going to keep undercutting themselves every 6 months and being like, well, all that cool stuff we showed you in the phone from like 6 months ago, we put most of it in a much cheaper phone. Here you go. That doesn't seem like a good way to sell your flagship.
Yeah, the Pixel 4 seems like a business strategy change where like somebody knocked on their door and was like, hey, if you're going to keep doing this hardware thing, the profit margin needs to go way up. We need to stop losing money on this. I like the only way I can theorize the Pixel 4 changes being justified is if like Google needed higher profit margins on these phones for some reason. Because like we compare the Google hardware team to Apple and Samsung, but like in terms of size, Google is a very big advertising company, but Google's hardware division is nowhere near the size of Apple and Samsung. And I would imagine when you go to a camera vendor and Apple and Samsung say, yeah, we want 10 million units, and Google says we want 100,000 units, I would imagine the 10 million order gets a way lower price.
Yeah, Google probably is. I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, you're right. They're probably paying a premium on components because like they're doing small orders. And we know this like over the years. There was a problem that plagued the Nexus phones for ages where they just run out of phones so fast because Google was too afraid to build too many of them because they didn't want to lose money. Like the penny pinching is biting them in the ass so hard now. Like it's counterproductive. Like Google really if they're going to make this work, they need to be willing to burn money. And they have money. They can do it.
Right. I mean, but maybe that's what they've been doing with the Pixel line, because I think to compete with Apple and Samsung on specs and features and price, which is, I feel like, what they did from the Pixel like 1, 2, and 3, that must have been extremely expensive with low profit margins. And I think with the Pixel 4, they decided, hey, we have to not do that and not compete so much. Like you can buy an iPhone 11 for less than a Pixel 4.
Yeah. Yeah, and honestly, it's a better phone at being a phone. Like I use the 11 Pro Max for like a month, and it's an objectively better smartphone than the Pixel. I don't like the operating system it runs, but like as a smartphone, it's just better in basically every way. The cameras work better. The battery lasts like 10 times as long. The speakers are better. The haptics are better. The screen is better. Like everything about the experience, the whole product experience generally is just better. Everything works better. Like it charges faster even, like which you cannot say about an iPhone for years. And I feel like Google really just, I think you're right about like the cost cutting, because even as like materials wise, the Pixel 4 feels way cheaper than the 3XL. Like the 3XL felt very refined. Like it had that cool gradient on the glass and everything, like all the little polished cuts around the camera cutout. It looked very it was very polished. The Pixel 4 XL is 2 pieces of glass sandwiched around a pretty ugly camera module. And it's rimmed in plastic.
I do not like the plastic. I think it's metal with a plastic coating.
Yeah, maybe.
I do like this. I don't know what color you got, but
I got the white.
Okay, yeah, the white one has like a soft touch back that I like. I'm a fan of it. It doesn't seem like it has melted off yet either, or scratched away or anything. And I think that feels really nice. But yeah, the plastic sides are weird.
Yeah, it's just strange, and it does not feel to me as premium as the 3XL. I think that there were definitely some material changes, probably. I mean, this is the kind of stuff, again, like where I think you're right about supply chain coming to be an issue. Like Apple can make the iPhone 11 Pro out of stainless steel because they sell so damn many of them that they can afford to like CNC stainless. Nobody else is going to do that because it's a huge waste of money. But Apple's shipping in so much volume that it can afford to use these more exotic, expensive materials.
Right, and also they have the capital to investigate that kind of thing and build a supply line that can actually make that, because there ain't an existing, let's mill a phone out of stainless steel or whatever it is they did. Like Apple does this all the time, where they create a supply line that did not exist before.
Yeah.
And I feel like Google can only go around and say, hey, like the back of the Pixel 3, where it was like a soft touch glass that you could scratch. I swear the way that happened is somebody went to them and it was like, hey, we came up with this new glass technology. Do you want to use it in your phone? And Google was like, sure. Like that. I don't think that kind of stuff is the thing where Google can go in and ask someone to make for them.
Yeah, Google is not a materials science company. That's not something they can achieve. And I think that goes to show with the component choices too. Like the Pixel 4 this year, they're using basically the same Sony image sensor they used last year. Like they're not even bothering to upgrade to the latest and greatest stuff because it's too expensive.
Yep.
Like I've heard like the new 108 megapixel Sony sensors are like $40 or something a piece. Like they're expensive for a phone part, but companies like Redmi and like Samsung are going to start using them immediately because they know like got to have those megapixels, because guess what? Everybody's like doing these stupid like spec sheet comparisons. And I think it's Google's frugalness is probably hurting them worse now with the phones than it would even like 4 years ago, because it's hard to differentiate. It's hard to stand out. And when you use stuff that's objectively less good than your competitors, like you're just setting yourself up for all these negative comparisons.
Yeah, they do a great job of propping up their crappy old camera sensor with great software. But I mean, I don't really like that. I feel like it's a shame. I sit there and I think, wow, what could Google's camera team do with, a modern camera sensor, like what gets shipped in, a Huawei phone, or one of those 100 megapixel, like whatever things. It's just they just keep shipping the same stuff. Like Google called it a software-defined camera, and it's like, okay, yeah, but you shouldn't keep the same hardware year after year. Like, upgrade everything. It would be so much better if they could.
Yeah. And so the good question from the chat here is, do we feel like there's a 5-year future for Pixel as a phone brand? I don't know.
I did put that in my review. Like, if the Pixel line was a Google software project, it would probably be up for cancellation soon. I feel like hardware requires more of a commitment than software, and I feel like there's some behind the scenes motivation to do this. Like the Android people will still tell you, like, this is the phone that we develop Android on. Like, if nothing else, we need to build a phone that we can use for development, that we have schematics and source code to and all that stuff, that they wouldn't get from a third-party phone. And so because that's why the Nexus line started. It was like, because we have to do this anyway, we might as well just release it. And like, I think the best case scenario is they go back to a more Nexus style thing where they're like, yeah, we're not going to release like a Pixel 5. It's just going to be the A series kind of price point. And I think if they did that, it would be fine, because if you can't compete with people on execution and specs and stuff, compete with them on price, and like, that's fine.
Yeah. And but Google has built up this whole, like, they have this image they've created now where we're a hardware company. We need to be talked about in the same sentence as Apple and Samsung. That really has been clearly the goal of like the Pixel team. Like, that's why, like, they make laptops. Like, there's no good reason for Google to be a laptop company. Like, why? Unless literally the laptops they make, the people who work at Google can't use them because they don't run the software necessary for those people to do their damn jobs. Like, how can you, like, it's one of those things where they're doing it for completeness. Like, they're doing it because, like, oh, well, Apple has laptops, Microsoft has laptops, Samsung has laptops. We should also have a laptop to fill out our ecosystem. And that just doesn't make any sense. Whereas with the phones, like, there's at least a reason for Google to make a phone. Like, they make the world's most popular operating system. So it makes sense that they should have a reference device like to test it on. But the whole shift to like making it a consumer brand and like heavy on advertising. Like, if you live in the San Francisco area, you see Pixel billboards everywhere. Like, they really advertise the hell out of that phone. But like, I just feel like that Google has not brought this together in a way where I feel like it's actually a serious business. They spend money like it's a serious business probably, but I've never gotten the sense of like Google is really, like, especially like one of the big things is like, just like comparative testing. Like, how does your product stack up against the, stuff you're allegedly trying to compete with? It seems like Google just doesn't care about that at all. Like, they actively ignore what everybody else is doing.
Yeah, it's totally baffling. It's very what Jules brought up HTC in the chat, and like, Google bought a bunch of HTC. I want to use the phrase they bought HTC employees, but that's wrong. They acquired HTC's like manufacturing division, or part of their manufacturing division, and like the Pixel 4, the whole Pixel line reminds me a lot of HTC phones, where it's like, here's this device that is completely oblivious to the market, and a new one comes out every year, and it's very expensive, and it doesn't really have a lot of features or anything that stand out from the crowd. It's just here's a new device, and we're going to do this every year until we give up and kind of coast along the bottom of the market. And that is where the Pixel line is. I think they have like 0.3% market share, according to the IDC. And they only sell these phones in like 14 countries instead of the 170 you can buy a Samsung phone in. And it's just they seem so not serious about building a smartphone. And at this point, I'm just asking, like, why? Why are we doing this? Who is this for? What purpose does it serve to continue this failing smartphone division? Like, we all gave the first model the benefit of the doubt, but like, it's been 4 years now. And is the Pixel line growing or getting better or doing things better? Like, no, all of the same problems with the Pixel 1 are still here. It's still poorly distributed. The design is like years behind, or at least a year or two behind the competition. The software is cool, but like companies are catching up to that, and nothing's changed over 4 years, and it's time to not be so nice about it.
Yeah, I have to agree. This is the first year like I felt like if somebody like people have asked me like, oh, should I buy the new Pixel? Is it good? Because I've always recommended them in the past, generally speaking. And this year I'm like, no, you probably shouldn't. Like, just don't. Like, if you really want a Google phone, go buy the 3A XL. It's going to be on sale on Black Friday. You can get it like for stupid cheap. Like, and if you don't, like, if you just want a good phone, I've just been telling everybody to buy the OnePlus 7T. I'm like, no, you should just go buy that. Like, it's a much better use of your money. Like, keep it for 2 years, resell it. You'll be able to upgrade to whatever you want. It'll keep most of its value. Like with Pixel phones, like another part of it, like that has just been so frustrating to me. Google actively undermines the resale value of their smartphones. Like they actively make them sell for way less money because like within, of course, like a month of the phone coming out, they're going to chop $200 off of it. And of course, they'll sell probably way more over Black Friday than they did during launch. And the resale price of their phones on the market will go down probably about $200. Like, and then we'll have more and more sales and they'll just get cheaper and cheaper. And eventually, like a used Pixel is worth like a bag of peanuts. It really is sad. And you go like to go trade in like they're not even trying to cultivate loyalty, which is like baffling to me. Like if you have a Pixel 3 XL and you want to upgrade to the 4 XL, Google will offer you like some like really insultingly low amount of money for your phone because their trade-in values are based on market values from their reconditioning partner. Like they're not just like sucking it up and subsidizing the cost of upgrading for older customers. They'd be like, nah, that's what we're giving you because that's what our reconditioning partner says they're willing to pay. Like it's just so insulting.
Yeah, I'm the same as you. I have no desire to use a Pixel 4 for my daily driver. I mean, there's one on my desk somewhere, and I'm not interested in using it. I'm using a OnePlus 7 Pro with the fancy pop-up camera. I even at $200 off, is that a good deal for a Pixel 4? Like if a Pixel 4 had a OnePlus logo on the back of it, how much would it cost?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that number would probably be around $500.
Yeah, I don't want a Pixel 4 for $200 off. That's still too expensive.
Yeah. And you know, like OnePlus to me has been like increasingly like the reason I just can't support, you know, Google's pricing because OnePlus's phones have gotten pretty damn good, period. Like there's not a lot of but to OnePlus's phones anymore. Like there are little things like, yeah, they won't give it a water resistance rating. And I don't really understand why. It's probably because Oppo doesn't know how to build water resistant phones. But like everything else about it is like, yeah, screen's really good. It charges stupid fast. Like the battery life's pretty decent. You know, the screen, you know, like Ryan doesn't like the screen as much, but I think it's totally fine. The cameras are decent. They're passable. They work. Like they're not amazing, but honestly, like they produce better images than Samsung phones do in a lot of situations. So you couldn't say that about OnePlus like 3 years ago. You know, sure, the Google phone, like the Pixel, takes better pictures, but most people are not going to care about marginally, subjectively better pictures compared to, oh, by the way, the other one costs like $350 less and actually performs better. And probably most people like it more, quite frankly.
Yeah, and what did it for me is I got Android 10 in 15 days on the 7.
Yep. Totally. Yeah. OnePlus is killing it with the updates these days. They're proving that like Google's all of their claimed advantages and like, oh, well, because we run Android, we know how to do Android best. It's like, no, actually, I think OnePlus to probably put out like a phone with fewer day one critical bugs than Google at this point.
Yeah.
Like the behavior of my Pixel 4 XL, like there's just so many like weird little things where it's like, this is normal Google, but guys, you've been doing this for like 9 years. Like you can't launch a phone that works properly like day one. It's insanely aggravating.
Yeah. Oh man, did you see the Stadia day one issues too? Like they people have controllers but no access codes to use the controllers.
Oh yeah, I saw that.
And man, like one of the things was like the game crashed like server side, and I think Destiny 2 runs at medium settings on Stadia. So it's like worse than an Xbox. And yeah, like Google launches everything like that. It's all stuff that's completely broken on release and needs to be updated weeks and months afterwards. And yeah, it's a mess.
It's rough. That's why I finally, like, after years, like a couple years of using Chrome OS, I switched back to Windows on my laptop. I'm like, I'm done with this. I waited for years for Google to like get it together with Chrome, and they never have. Like, Chrome is still basically the same operating system it was like 5 years ago.
Yeah, I think Linux made it worse and more complicated and more annoying.
Oh, the Android app support is like literally the worst thing. I just stopped using any Android apps on my Chromebook because they behave horribly buggy. They break stuff, like just not good. The file handling situation is an actual nightmare. Like, getting Chrome OS to talk to the Android apps and like what files they've stored is like not explained anywhere in any kind of good detail. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Like, it's just things like that. Google is very happy, it feels like sometimes, to leave things broken because they're like, well, most people don't use it that way or care about it. And it's like, well, guys, like those edge cases are what are defining your products in the press and media. Like, when your stuff doesn't do the stuff that everybody else's stuff does, well, guess what people are going to focus on? Like, if handling files on Chrome OS is a nightmare, what do you think people are going to focus on when they review like a Chrome laptop? They're probably going to focus on that.
Yeah, but also, like, I don't think it's insane to look at a Chrome OS laptop and be like, yeah, okay, cool. Look, I need content creation tools. Photoshop, some kind of video editor, things like that. And Linux doesn't really fix those problems. Android doesn't really fix those problems. They seem to not have a problem complicating the operating system, but they don't want to complicate it in a way that I feel like would broaden the consumer base more. Because I feel like content creation is a pretty common market for people to target. I mean, you see Apple ads for things that like exclusively target that. It's like, oh, you can draw on our tablets and make videos and stuff on our MacBooks. And like Apple owns that market. Like, try to go after it.
Yeah, it's aspirational. I think that's like one of the things that, like, when I talk to people like on the Google team about like what the Pixels can do, like, there was that podcast that The Verge had with one of the camera leads, and they're like, well, why doesn't the Pixel 4 do 4K 60 video? Like, why doesn't it record? And he's like, well, basically 80% of people are never going to use that feature, and it takes up a bunch of storage. So why we didn't think it was worth doing. Like, we just thought that wasn't a necessary feature for our phone. And it's like, well, guys, all of your competitors' phones have this. And if storage is the complaint, you could put more storage in the phone. I don't know.
Yeah. And I think it was Nilay who was like, don't you own YouTube? Like,
right.
This is the perfect thing to, here, record this thing with video and send it to YouTube. Like, get some cross-company synergy going.
Or like just the basic things. Like, Android does not have a competent video editing application. Doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Like, Google, like you said, company that owns YouTube, company that like has the platform with like the most content creators and would have like probably a very receptive audience to like building an in-house like video editing and creation tool. Like, they're just totally uninterested in it because it's too big, it's too hard. Like, they've had so many years to do
for Honeycomb.
Yes, I remember that. I was going to say that. Yes, they made one briefly for Honeycomb. And it's just like, there's no will inside Google to do anything, it feels like, that doesn't, conform to the whole, well, 80% of people do X. Like, if we're talking about that other 20% of people, those don't matter. Like, we're not going to build products to that specification because that's silly. We should focus our energy on the mass audience. It's like, well, guys, like, that 20% of people that you're not concerned with are the 20% of people telling the 80% of people where to spend their money and like what's good.
Yeah, influencers. I'm sure all the public relations people will tell you to go for influencers, but yeah, Google does care.
Yeah, they really don't seem to. Anyway, I think we've ragged on Google enough today. There seems to be a lot of harping on Google going on in this podcast lately, and admittedly, that is my fault. But they have so frustrated me.
That's not your fault. They deserve it.
They have so frustrated me. And we just found out today that the Pixel 3 is basically out of stock on the Google store. Like, it's gone. They have the not pink 3XL, and that's all that's left.
Yeah, have they sold? Oh, well, because the Pixel 3a is out now, so they don't have to sell the old versions anymore.
I guess, yeah, because they sold the Pixel 2 all the way through April this year. Like, so this would be killing the last generation of the phone 6 months early.
Well, I think they just say stop manufacturing, and then they sell it until they're gone.
Yeah, I guess so. It's just another one of those things like, well, like it's good to do that in a sense because like look what Apple does with it. They use it to create like a tier structure for their phones where like, okay, you don't have money to buy an iPhone 11 Pro, but you can buy an iPhone 8 or like an iPhone like a regular old iPhone 10 and they're way cheaper. I think the iPhone 8 is like $450, something like that.
Yeah, well,
Right?
I think the iPhone line probably has like a cohesive manufacturing machine behind
Yes.
it, and every Pixel phone seems like it's been formed completely from scratch and is unrelated to the other device.
Yeah, that's been a bit of an issue for them as well, unfortunately. I guess, probably would be too expensive to keep manufacturing phones that don't sell as many copies at Foxconn, but probably the least of Google's concerns for their smartphone business. Okay, I think we are running a little long at this point. So, Ron, thank you so much for coming on the show today to rant with me.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. All the topics we talked about today can be found at androidpolice.com/podcast. We're live 4 times a week. That's 3 podcasts, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, around noon Pacific. And on Tuesdays, we have our Q&A show. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Please send an email to podcast@androidpolice.com if you have feedback. If it's negative feedback, don't send it. I don't need to hear it. Ron, where can people find you?
ArsTechnica.com for long articles and stuff. If you want to hear me whine about whatever's happening up to the minute, that's Twitter.com/Ron Amadeo. That's Amadeo is my last name. Yeah.
Okay. On Twitter, I am RDRV3. Our producer, Jules Wang, is at Point Jules, and our theme music is by Home. We're back again on Friday, but until then, take care and stay hydrated. I'm not sure what the hydrated's about, but you should stay hydrated. That's important advice. And I think we're good to cut, Jules.